There's a special kind of fear reserved for crimes that happen in places people consider sacred, not just safe protected. A church at night, a quiet Illinois neighborhood in winter, a beach town in daylight, a teacher's home before work. These are the places where people tell themselves, that won't happen here. And then, it does. Tonight, we're covering 5 cases that prove something brutal. Safety is often an illusion, and the people who survive these mysteries don't just carry grief. They carry the weight of not knowing, sometimes for half a lifetime. We start at Stanford University, in a church, late at night, with a newlywed who said she wanted to pray, and never walked out again. October 12, 1974, Palo Alto, California. 19-year-old Arliss Perry was newly married. Weeks into a life that was supposed to be bright, she and her husband, Bruce, had moved to California so he could attend Stanford. That night, after a disagreement, Arliss left their apartment. She said she wanted to clear her head. She wanted to walk. She wanted to go to Stanford Memorial Church to pray. It's hard to describe what that means, psychologically. When someone chooses a church in the middle of the night, they're not choosing danger. They're choosing quiet. They're choosing comfort. They're choosing a place they believe the world cannot reach. Arliss went in around 11:15 p.m. She didn't come home. By midnight, Bruce was worried. He went to the church locked. Dark. Campus security was called. At 5:45 a.m., a security guard named Stephen Crawford discovered Arliss' body inside. The scene was disturbing. Investigators described deliberate placement of religious items around her body, details that suggested ritualistic staging. Immediately, the case became a campus legend, a horror story whispered with extra fear because it happened in a church. But in the 1970s, forensic technology was limited. Evidence was collected, stored, and slowly, time began to win. The case went cold, and Bruce Perry never moved on. He didn't remarry. He kept her memory alive. He waited. Then decades later, in 2018, investigators retested biological evidence using modern DNA methods. They found a profile, and when they ran it, it matched Stephen Crawford, the man who discovered her. Now, on paper, someone could argue, of course his DNA would be there. He entered the church, but investigators didn't stop at the match. They looked at access. Crawford worked security. He knew schedules. He could have a key. He could lock the church from inside. He could hide before closing. And when detectives went to his home in July 2018 to question him, he took his own life. No confession, no explanation. But the timing spoke for itself. In June 2018, authorities announced the case would be closed, with Crawford identified as the perpetrator. And after 44 years, Arliss' family finally had an answer, one that felt like relief and nausea at the same time. Because what do you do with the truth when the person responsible never stands in court? What do you do when the only punishment is a headline? And what do you do when you realize the monster wasn't a stranger lurking outside? He was the one holding the keys. Now we move to Illinois, where winter roads are quiet, fields feel endless, and the cold doesn't just freeze your hands, it freezes evidence. January 1976, 16-year-old Pamela Mora disappeared from Woodridge, Illinois. She was last seen walking near her home. Days later, her body was found in a field. The harm was horrific. The kind of violence that tells you the perpetrator didn't just want control. They wanted domination. They wanted destruction. Investigators chased leads, interviewed people, checked alibis, pulled threads until their hands bled. But nothing held. The case went cold. One of those files that quietly collects dust while families keep living with the same question. Why her? For decades, her family remembered her in rituals, anniversaries, memorials, old photos held too long, and somewhere in storage, biological evidence sat sealed, waiting for science. Then, in 2020, investigators made a decision that sounds like something from a movie. They wanted to exhume a man, Bruce Lindahl, dead since 1981, a former person of interest in multiple cases. A man who, on the outside, looked like a normal neighbor, a public persona, a life, a job, sports, familiarity. But behind that, a predator. The exhumation wasn't simple. It required legal approval, forensic planning, careful handling. They extracted DNA from Lindahl's remains, compared it to preserved evidence from Pamela's case, and the match came back definitive. After 44 years, Pamela's family finally had the name. But the name came with another punch. Lindahl was suspected in multiple cases, the kind of suspect who moves across jurisdictions, leaving victims scattered so no one sees the pattern until it's too late. And the cruel irony, Lindahl's violence ended in 1981, when he attacked someone else. and that intended victim fought back, hard, violently, desperately. And in that struggle, Lindahl was fatally injured. The victim survived and unknowingly stopped a serial predator. But by then, Pamela was already gone. And for Pamela's family, closure didn't feel like closure. It felt like finally seeing the face of someone who had been out of reach for decades, and realizing the justice system would never put him on trial because nature had done it first. 3 years after Pamela, another young woman vanished in Illinois. March 1979, 19-year-old Kathy Holler disappeared from North Aurora. She wasn't the type to just leave. Family reported her missing quickly. Weeks later, her remains were found in the Fox River, and water does something terrible to investigations. It steals clarity. It washes away trace evidence. It degrades DNA. It turns answers into guesses. For 45 years, Kathy's case remained unsolved. But after Lindahl was identified in Pamela's case, investigators started asking the obvious question: what if he wasn't done? In 2024, they used an advanced extraction method called MVA, essentially using sterile water and suction to pull biological material from fabric in ways traditional swabbing can't. They applied it to Kathy's preserved clothing. It worked. They developed a DNA profile, and it matched Bruce Lindahl. Another family received answers they never thought they'd see. Another community learned the predator had been closer than they ever knew. And it reinforced a terrifying reality. Some killers don't stop. They get stopped. And if no one connects the dots, their victims remain isolated stories instead of a pattern. Now we go to one of the most famous nameless cases in American history. July 26, 1974, Provincetown, Massachusetts. A woman walking her dog in the dunes near Race Point Beach finds a body partially buried in the sand. The victim had been deceased for weeks. She had suffered severe trauma. She wore blue jeans and distinctive jewelry, but no identification. And due to the condition of her body, the case became nearly impossible with 1970s technology. For decades, she was known only as the Lady of the Dunes, a name that sounds poetic until you realize it means, we don't know who you are, but you died here. Theories swirled for nearly half a century: organized crime drifters, secret lives. Her jewelry suggested she wasn't destitute. The location suggested someone wanted her hidden, but not too far. And still, no name. Until 2022, genetic genealogy changed everything. DNA was extracted, uploaded, matched to relatives. And finally, she was identified as Ruth Marie Terry, originally from Tennessee. Her name came back from the dead. And then, the next part hit like a second wave. Investigators tied her to a man named Guy Moldavin, her husband, a man already suspected in other disappearances, a man with a history of shifting stories and leaving devastation behind. Moldavin had died in 2002, so there would be no trial, no cross-examination, no prison sentence. But authorities officially closed the case in 2023, identifying him as responsible. And one of the most heartbreaking details during the process, a relative searching for his biological mother learned Ruth was his mother. Answers can heal, and answers can break you in new ways. But at least Ruth's name came back. At least she stopped being a symbol. She became a person again. Our final case takes us to Pennsylvania. December 21st, 1992. 25-year-old Christy Merkin, elementary school teacher, was found killed in her home. No forced entry. Nothing stolen. The kind of crime that feels personal, targeted, intentional. Her community was shaken. Her family pleaded publicly for answers. Investigators interviewed everyone. And they did have something powerful: DNA. But in 1992, databases were limited. No match came. So the profile sat, preserved, waiting. Then, in 2018, investigators used genetic genealogy and built a family tree, leading to a local man, Raymond Rowe, a DJ, a familiar face in the community, someone known. And that's the part that always chills people. The suspect isn't always the guy who looks like a monster. Sometimes it's the guy you've seen at events. The guy who seems normal. The guy who's been around. Investigators collected his DNA from discarded gum. Match Rowe was arrested in June 2018. He pleaded guilty in January 2019. Life without parole. No clear motive emerged that made the crime feel reasonable. No satisfying why. And that is what families often have to accept. Justice doesn't always come with understanding. Christie's family got a conviction, but they didn't get their daughter back. And the community had to live with the fact that for decades, the person responsible lived among them. 5 cases: a church, a field, a river, the dunes, a teacher's home. Different places, different victims, different decades, but they all share a single brutal truth. The past doesn't stay buried forever. Not when blood leaves DNA. Not when evidence is preserved. Not when families refuse to let the world forget. And yet, every one of these cases also leaves us with the same question. How many more are still out there waiting in boxes, in barrels, in storage rooms, just one technological leap away from being solved?